Phala Phala, the two words that President Cyril Ramaphosa does not want to hear, but two words that I think might just define the post-2024 election political landscape. Phala Phala is here to stay, and it's going to be one of the biggest political stories once all this election turmoil dies down. And in this episode, I'm going to give you a full guide to exactly how and why this question may well occupy Parliament, the courts, the media, and much of society after this election, and why it's the soft underbelly of any coalition government after 2024, led by Cyril Ramaphosa. Let's get into it. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX on this channel, the Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh experience. We explore South African politics through interviews and analysis. And on today's episode, I want to do a deep dive on the Phala Phala scandal. This has been one of the few media platforms that has actually kept an eye on this important question of presidential accountability. And I believe it has been forgotten, swept under the carpet, and is due to make a return if President Cyril Ramaphosa ends up leading the new government after coalition talks following the May election. Now, in this episode, I want to refresh your memory on Phala Phala and particularly explain what the legal and political and parliamentary prospects are for this question to resurge onto the national scene. And then I want to talk about the political dynamics and why any opposition party that goes into coalition with the ANC led by Cyril Ramaphosa will have to have some kind of plan for Phala Phala and should think very carefully and cautiously as they engage in coalition talks with this question and about this question of Phala Phala. So I'll start with an explainer and then go into the politics. Now, let's get into the explanation part. Okay, so we all know, I think by now as a country, that President Cyril Ramaphosa had cash stashed in his couch on his farm in Phala Phala. And in June 2020, Arthur Fraser, who is one of Cyril Ramaphosa's deputy ministers and had been in government long before that, basically outed that the cash that was stashed in the couch got stolen. Now, on first impression, leave aside where the cash was, the fact that something gets stolen from someone is actually not something that implicates the victim of that theft. But several questions emerged when President Cyril Ramaphosa accepted and admitted that this cash had actually been taken and was there. He's never denied that. Let me put it that way. Questions emerged as to, well, firstly, how much it was, and it turned out that it was something around $580,000 US. So big amounts in foreign currency as well. And when presidents have foreign currency lying around their private residences, warning bells start to go off, right? Because it gives you images of the worst forms of presidential corruption. And of course, we also know that when there are large stashes of cash stolen, large enough to attract this kind of attention, sometimes that gives rise to questions of money laundering, because if you don't report big amounts of stolen money, that can sometimes be an indicator, it's obviously not conclusive proof, that there could be some kind of money laundering going on. That's why the law mandates that you have to say when that amount of money has been stolen. So President Ramaphosa supposedly reports it to his head of security. He never actually opens a case himself at the police and says that he thought that, his head of security, Mr. Wali Rueda, I believe, would take care of it. The Presidential Protection Unit, which I think is a unit linked to the police, but is not a formal place where you can report a crime in the same way as the usual reporting. Cool. So we know the background to the Phala Phala scandal. So the question is, where did the money come from? What was it for? The president says it was for the sale of a buffalo. And I've done a lot of videos, so you can go back into my archives to explain the scandal and all that surrounds it. Now, ultimately, we get to the point where this goes to Parliament. And Parliament then says, no, we need to look into this in more detail because this could be grounds for the impeachment of the president. And the way impeachment works, following the impeachment judgment of the Constitutional Court, which gave some advice on this, is before you can have an impeachment inquiry in Parliament, an independent panel of experts needs to look at the facts and actually discover whether, in legal language, there's a prima facie case to answer. In modern or normal language, if there's smoke, you don't have to figure out if there's fire, because a deeper inquiry can actually figure out if there's fire. But is there some smoke here, or is this just some frivolous political thing, right? So this was called the Section 89 panel. It's the section in the Constitution dealing with impeachment, and this panel, headed by a former Chief Justice, Justice Ngcobo, looks into this matter in more depth, right? They got submissions from various political parties. They had what facts were at their disposal, and they look into this, right? They come out with this report, which is a bombshell. This is the report that nearly makes President Ramaphosa resign. Never mind going into an inquiry, just purely based on the report. Because a former Chief Justice, Sandile Ngcobo, says, I've looked at these facts to the extent that I have them. I've taken the submissions, and it looks like there's smoke. It really does. What he says is that it's possible that the president breached his oath of office. It's possible that the president contravened various sections of the Constitution, which prevent presidents from being engaged in conflicts of interest around paid work and just not having side gigs while you're president. And probably most damning, the Chief Justice says there's actually also smoke to the extent that there actually could be criminality here. So like I said earlier, there's this law, which is the main anti-corruption law called PRECA. And in that law, it specifically says, if you have big amounts of cash stolen and you don't report it, that is a crime, right? And we know that the president didn't report, and he had more money than the minimum threshold outlined in that act. So the Chief Justice and others writing this report say, Parliament, we're not saying that the president is guilty beyond reasonable doubt here, but we are saying that there is at least a prima facie possibility that this happened, that there was wrongdoing, and you need to look into it in more depth. So what happens after that? After that, President Ramaphosa nearly resigns. He gets convinced out of resigning. And the matter goes to Parliament, right? So Parliament is now voting on should there be an inquiry or not, based on this report that Parliament itself asked for, which says there should be one, right? But what happens is that the ANC effectively wields its majority to shield the president from this inquiry. So the ANC says, yes, the former Chief Justice might have said that there's a prima facie case here, or there's prima facie wrongdoing, but we don't think there is. We think this report is flawed. They didn't actually challenge the report, but they just said, we disagree with the report, and therefore there will be no inquiry. And because at that time, the ANC had an overwhelming majority in Parliament, they were able to vote that inquiry down. Now, shamefully, a few other smaller opposition parties like Good abstained instead of doing the right thing and actually voting that there should have been an inquiry, in my view. So the ANC, with some of its supporters, helped to get that report voted down. Now, what happened then was that we were in an interesting position in that there had been this report that said there was prima facie wrongdoing, but Parliament voted against the report. Now, in between that period, President Ramaphosa had vowed and actually had approached the Constitutional Court to challenge the report, right, to reverse its findings. But when Parliament voted the report down, it became what's called moot in legal language, academic, because the court no longer had to decide whether the report should be struck down because there were actually no consequences that flowed from the report. There was going to be no inquiry, even though the report called for one, because Parliament had preempted that. So that application to strike the report down actually never went further. And I'm not sure whether it was withdrawn or whether the court just dismissed it for mootness, but that was the end of the president's attempt to challenge the report. So we're in this interesting legal position where we have a report that's never been challenged, but the outcomes it proposes have also never been adopted. So we're in this interesting kind of limbo area. Now, what then happens in parallel is that the EFF approaches the Western Cape High Court before this parliamentary vote, and through its counsel, the excellent Mfesane Kasiboto, who I've actually had on this channel before and who's a brilliant advocate, tries to push that vote happens by secret ballot, and the Western Cape High Court votes against or goes against that argument and says, no, it doesn't have to be by secret ballot. The EFF then challenges that decision and appeals it to the Constitutional Court, but by now we have President Ramaphosa's attempt to challenge that report, and so there's like a two-way application, which is to challenge Ramaphosa's challenge to the report and to say this should happen by secret ballot. But as I say, all of those applications and all of those fights end up not materializing before the ConCourt because it's moot. Parliament has voted the report down. Thanks for watching SMWX. Before we get back to the episode, I just wanted to let you know the 4 ways that you can help support this channel if you want to see us growing bigger and better to keep you more entertained and informed. The first way is you can invite me to speak at your company, your school, your institution. You'll see the contact details down below. The second way is that you can become a member of this channel. Become a member, or you can give us a thanks. You'll see there's like a heart with a $sign in the ribbon below this video. Buy me and the team some coffee for this episode. The third way you can get involved is you can advertise on the channel. Now, I'd much rather the community of viewers would be advertisers on this channel than me going out to people who don't really know about SMWX and trying to explain it to them. So if you're a viewer and you have a business and you want to partner and you love this platform, let's partner on this channel. And then finally, you can buy merchandise, you can buy books. All this is in the description down below. Now let's get back to the episode. Let's fast forward. The EFF says, okay, cool, fine, moot. But earlier this year in February, they say, instead of challenging the secret ballot judgment and instead of challenging Ramaphosa's challenge to the report, we're going to now institute a new challenge, which is challenging Parliament's decision, or the National Assembly, to be more precise's decision, not to adopt the report. Basically saying, look, there was no rationality behind that decision. It was the pure abuse of majoritarianism to defend wrongdoing. And in particular, we saw the same kind of abuse of parliamentary majorities during the Zuma presidency. And we did have the court intervening, particularly on the question of Nkandla, and actually excoriating the National Assembly for not playing more of an oversight role in actually investigating and holding to account President Zuma over the Nkandla scandal. So there is precedent for the ConCourt actually saying the National Assembly needs to play its oversight role more forcefully. And we also heard Chief Justice Zondo saying the same thing in the State Capture Report. So the EFF then launches this application to challenge Parliament's decision. And you may have seen recently that the ConCourt has now accepted and will hear this application, probably sometime around August, September, I'm told. So we have a really fascinating big political battle before the courts looming, unless much changes. to the extent that we're going to have a new government that is trying to cohere and has to unite around a president. But that president is going to be under pressure within the Constitutional Court, where the EFF is going to be trying to bring Phala Phala and Parliament's failure to deal with Phala Phala back into the public imagination. And that's why I'm going over this issue again, because I foresee in one scenario in the not too distant future that after and if a new government is formed around Cyril Ramaphosa as president, one of the first big tests that government is going to have to face is Phala Phala, and the question of whether Ramaphosa should remain in office, given what could be an adverse ConCourt ruling, or at least a very unwelcome ConCourt challenge, even if he wins. So that is a synopsis of where we stand with Phala Phala and how it's being brought back onto the scene of South African politics and how it's looming over any new government and any new Ramaphosa presidency. And indeed why I think it's short-sighted that political parties are hitching their wagons, as is the ANC, to a Ramaphosa presidency when it is clearly heading in the direction of controversy. So I want to think about some of the politics of this, right? Because if we get a multi-party coalition government that has a clear opposition that is not part of that government, right? Whether that opposition is the EFF, MK, which is probably likely, or the DA even. Less likely from my current vantage point. No matter which parties are in opposition, if I'm advising opposition parties, I'm saying the first place you go to challenge the credibility of the new government and to test its unity, but also just in terms of public support, because we know that South Africans are tired of corruption and tired of presidents using their power to avoid and escape scrutiny. The first place you go is Phala Phala. You're not too disruptive. You're not overplaying your hand. You're using parliamentary channels and the courts and public opinion to say there's a question that needs to be answered here and our institutions need to answer this question. We can't be in limbo for years and years, right? While we wait for law enforcement agencies that take a decade to come to a conclusion, right? As a country, we need clarity now, and we are pressing that clarity home. That's what I would do if I was in opposition to a new government. The first thing that could be done is that Phala Phala can actually be reintroduced in the new parliament, right? And give that parliament a decision to make. Will you or won't you reconsider whether you should create an investigation? Now, that could be an impeachment investigation, or it could just be an ad hoc parliamentary inquiry. But one way or another, I would be raising this back in Parliament and saying, okay, Parliament, we're in a new era of accountability now, which is great. Various ministers have resigned, the Speaker resigned, but the true test of accountability is the most powerful person in the country. Let's re-look at this. We're not saying the president should be stepped down or be impeached yet. We just want to know the truth, and we also want to hear from him on the record, and we want to hear from these various sources what happened, because there are just too many questions unanswered. And then what you'll do is you'll put the government in an awkward position, because they either have to support Ramaphosa, which is going to look dodgy, or they're going to throw him under the bus, in which case you're going to have a weak president with clouds over his head, right? Very, very close to a motion of no confidence if things go the wrong way for him. And then on top of that, you're going to still have this legal challenge, potentially, to Parliament's earlier decision about whether it should have considered the report and taken its recommendations more seriously. So you're going to have a political climate in and around the August-September period, but also maybe building up to that previously in Parliament, where I think this is going to be one of the most important issues. And I'm very interested to see what is the ANC's strategy around this. They usually don't have one. It's usually just give it to the Integrity Commission and hope for the best and sweep it under the carpet, right? But now the tectonic political plates have shifted. The ANC cannot just rely on whipping its MPs and saying, you have to follow the party line, because even if every ANC MP follows the party line, they don't have a majority. Fam, you asked for some SMWX merch and we have delivered. I know you're always looking for ways to help support and grow this channel, so why don't you buy yourself an SMWX hoodie? Super comfy, super warm, and you can represent SMWX. You can check the link down below for how to buy your SMWX hoodie and help build and grow this channel so we can bring you more interviews, more analysis, and more educational insights. Now let's get back to it. Will President Ramaphosa be able to rely on opposition party allies to defend him? And what would the political fallout be if a DA, for example, sacrificed their anti-corruption stance to defend someone who would effectively be their president? Same for the EFF. It's actually compounds for the EFF if they're part of any government, right? Because they would have to think, we brought this court application. Are we going to withdraw it and then look like we no longer care about this issue? Or are we going to back that, in which case Ramaphosa might fall? So as you can see, things are building up. In the short-term coalition dynamics, people aren't thinking about this, but give it 3 months, 2 months, and you will see this issue back at the forefront of South African politics. The fact of the matter is that this issue just can't go away one way or the other. We've seen the public protector exonerating the president and the Reserve Bank exonerating the president, both for different reasons, by the way, and both with conflicting reports. I just don't think that there is any universe in which this issue is at least not a thorn in the president's side, and in the worst case scenario could be the straw that breaks the camel's back of the Ramaphosa presidency. However, we shall see what happens, because this new political terrain will throw up all kinds of surprises, and perhaps President Cyril Ramaphosa will do the impossible and manage to dodge and weave his way out, as he currently is and has done, out of accountability for Phala Phala. And the only way you can do that, if I'm advising him, by the way, is you turn around and you say to your coalition partners, look, Phala Phala doesn't look great, I'm not going to lie. But I'm all this coalition has in terms of a credible leader. Who is the alternative leader to a government right now? I'm asking you to back me on Phala Phala because I am able to bring this coalition together. And I would do that before the coalition comes together so that there's an agreement on Phala Phala. I wouldn't go into a coalition where I'm like, these partners could throw me under the bus, because then Ramaphosa will always be worried that something serious could happen. By the way, I haven't even got into whether one of the law enforcement agencies agrees with the former Chief Justice that there is a prima facie case of criminality here. And of course, if the Hawks or if the police decide that there needs to be an arrest effected, and if the NPA decides to prosecute, then of course we'll be in a different world. But leaving that aside and assuming that doesn't happen, Phala Phala is still set to be one of the most explosive issues on the South African political calendar, at least for the next political year. So keep your eye on that. You now have a full sense of exactly how things can play out, exactly where the legal and political intrigue lies. And I hope that SMWX has helped you understand that. Like, share, subscribe, share this with all your friends and all the people you know. Share it on WhatsApp, share it on social media. Tweet me if there's anything interesting that you thought happened in this episode. I will like, I will retweet. Let's keep growing this family of SMWX subscribers. We engage in South African politics here. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Feel free to disagree, by the way. I'm putting across an opinion and a view. You might take another one. That's also cool. We're all for debate around this channel. Like, share, subscribe, and remember to keep it locked on SMWX on all your podcast platforms and on YouTube. Aye.